Well, we've got a very special telecast planned for our viewers from the sidelines of the 10th CFA India conference here in Mumbai. It's the time when everybody in the markets is discussing geopolitics, macroeconomics. So we thought of getting you someone who's an authority on global macroeconomics, being associated with the IMF, the World Bank, even the US Federal Reserve in his previous avatars, and now, of course, runs his independent outfit, macroeconomic outfit. I'm talking about someone who's also known as Dr. Doom by some of the parts of the global financial media. I'm talking about Mr. Nouriel Roubini, who's joining me now. Mr. Roubini, it's a real pleasure and honor to be interacting with you today. Thanks so much for agreeing to this interview.
My pleasure.
You are visiting India at a time that not just about 48 hours away, the global financial markets were on tenterhooks, observing how Iran-US situation would pan out, especially after Mr. Soleimani's assassination and the retaliation from Iran. But markets actually were quite pleasantly surprised the way it all was dialed down. How do you see this issue? Do you think it's over for now? Or you've been talking about how US-Iran issue is panning out for some time now. What's your observation? This risk gone for now?
I don't think the risk is gone, and I think that markets are seriously underpricing this particular geopolitical risk. Markets are essentially assuming that maybe after this attack by Iran on US bases, not much else is going to happen. We're going to go back to the previous status quo. Now, that's the most positive scenario. Another extreme scenario, of course, will be one of a full-scale war. Maybe that's unlikely because neither Iran nor the United States and Trump want the full-scale war. But I think in between those two scenarios, one extreme full-scale war and everything being normal, there is going to be actually a series of confrontations between US and Iran directly, indirectly, using some of the local proxies. Iran could unleash its proxies in Iraq, in Syria, even against Israel. There could be other attacks against US assets and bases either in the regions or terrorist attack in the rest of the world, cyber attacks. And there could be a confrontation even within the Gulf that could also constrain production and exports of oil. So in that middle scenario of not a full-scale war but not normality, I think that my worry is that oil prices are going to go well above $70 per barrel, maybe closer to $80 per barrel. Of course, if there was a full-scale war, they could be above $100 per barrel. But even in that mild scenario in which the escalation is short of a full-scale war, you have a negative shock to the global economy. You have higher oil prices, you have business and investor sentiment down, you have a correction in global equity markets, and that, everything else equal, is going to slow down global growth further. Not a recession. You would get the recession only if there is a full-scale war and oil is above $100 per barrel, but there could be a slowdown of growth compared to what the markets are expecting right now.
So if you're saying that Middle East will simmer through, it will not cool down, what implications do you see this having on emerging markets like India? We are hugely dependent on crude oil. On the other hand, US has become net exporter of oil now. So it will work perhaps in their favor if the crude oil shoots up to that level that you're talking about. Some people also say that the way these tensions have come up right ahead of the American elections, it's like a pattern playing out. What are your thoughts on these?
Well, of course, a rise in oil prices has a positive impact on net oil exporters and a negative on net oil importers. The United States so far is not yet a net exporter, is reaching maybe independence on energy. But certainly there's a many number of countries in the world that are important and they are net oil importers. China, India, Turkey, Korea, among the emerging market economies, but also Japan, most of Europe, and most of the other advanced economy. So if oil prices were to go, say, from current level towards $80 per barrel, that's a negative growth impact on the global economy because the marginal propensity to spend of the oil exporters is lower than the marginal propensity to spend of the oil importers. And even within the United States, while producers of gas and oil will have a windfall in terms of their profits, users of oils, both consumers and households, are going to be hurt by having higher gasoline and utility prices, and other industries that are heavy users of oil are going to be hurt as well. So the distributional effects, even in the United States, slow down growth because the beneficiaries of that, the producers of oil and gas, are not going to spend much more, while the consumers are going to be hurt and spend less. So even within the US, it's a net negative.
In this kind of an environment where this situation is playing out, which you spoke about, how do you see or analyze the role of global central banks in propping up or supporting economies? We've seen a change of stance a couple of months back from the US Federal Reserve. You worked with US Federal Reserve very closely. How are you analyzing their stance and some of the other central banks, which are kind of in a tight spot right now?
Well, in the middle of last year, there were large concerns, even in the market, that you might have a global recession if the US-China trade war was to escalate or Brexit were to become hard. And certainly what saved both the real economy and also asset prices was the quite aggressive actions by the Fed, who cut rates 75 basis points 3 times, the ECB that went back to quantitative easing and cut policy rates, followed by other smaller central banks in Europe, and of course the Central Bank of China, the Reserve Bank of India, and many other emerging markets also had aggressive policy rates. So that helped the markets, but let's realize that at least in advanced economies, we're running out of policy bullets. The ECB is already at minus 50, how much more negative they can go. They're already doing quantitative easing and buying both government assets and private assets. The Bank of Japan is even more in aggressive accommodative stance by not only doing quantitative easing, negative policy rates, but targeting at zero the 10-year government bond yields. And therefore, and even the Fed right now is down to 1.5%, and therefore if a growth shock were to occur, they can go to zero, they can go back to forward guidance, they're going to go back to quantitative easing, but the impact of those policies is going to be less significant because you don't have much policy headroom. So we are in a world in which there are potential downside risks to the global economy, some negative shocks do occur, and central banks are literally running out of policy bullets.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Roubini, you earned the reputation of being called Dr. Doom because of your accurate prediction of 2008 financial crisis and the repercussions which happened. As we sit now, you are making a case for mild recession or prolonged slow global growth. How do you see emerging markets pan out in this light? India as a large emerging market, what do you see repercussions for this side of the world?
Well, my baseline for this year is not yet a global recession. I think that the global recession could occur if the confrontation between the US and Iran escalates in a full-scale war that would lead to oil prices above $100 per barrel. That is not my baseline. My baseline is of a limited, contained conflict. But even in that baseline, I would say that what's going to happen is that I see oil prices going at least towards $80 per barrel, if not above that. That's going to have a negative impact on the global economy and growth because there are lots of net oil importers and they tend to spend more than the net oil importers. And of course, within the emerging markets, slowdown of growth in US, in Europe and Japan is going to hurt overall emerging markets that are exporting either commodities or goods to advanced economies. And within those emerging markets, there are some emerging markets that are net oil importers. India is one example, China is another one, Korea is another one, and there are many others like Turkey and so on. So it's true that a small number of emerging markets, those in the Gulf and a couple of other countries, export oil and might be benefiting from that. But overall, the largest emerging markets are in a more fragile situation. And specifically in the case of India, of course, an economy where growth recently slowed down, having oil prices going towards $80 per barrel, if not above, has negative impact on the trade balance, has a negative impact on the fiscal position of the government, would have a negative impact, of course, on the growth rate of the economy.
But at the same time, would you not see this as a silver lining for economies which are more domestic-centric, like India is? They will be relatively shielded if we are moving towards deglobalization, fragmentation, more protectionist policies by various world premiers. do you think that we will relatively outperform economies which are more inward looking like India?
At the margin, you could argue that economies that are less open are going to be less negatively affected than those that are more open. That's true, but I think that one of the problems that India has faced that explains also part of its recent economic slowdown has been that India has not been as open on the trade side, on the investment, and so on. And part of a strategy that would lead to an increase in potential growth of India would suggest an opening up of the economy to a wide range of interaction with the global economy. So it's true that a country like India, when there is a major global shock, might be sheltered compared to a larger open economy like China or some of the smaller open economies in Asia and other parts of the world. But one of the constraints of India is they need to opening up, because that's going to be beneficial for potential growth over time.
Dr. Roubini, you analyze various economies in your travels across the world and your course at the New York University. How do you analyze the Indian economy right now, where we are coming from and where we intend to go? It's widely known that India is now targeting $5 trillion mark in the next couple of years, and by 2030, $7 or $10 trillion mark. Would it become challenging for India to remain inward looking and still achieve that mark? How the pressures of a changing global economy model will play, and how do you analyze our ambition of $5 trillion?
Well, that ambition is conditional on having a growth rate that is 7% or above. As you well know, there's been a pretty sharp slowdown in the last year in the Indian economy. The latest numbers that came out for the last quarter that were published were suggesting a slowdown down to 4.5%. Even the government expected for the current fiscal year growth rate might be at most 5%, and we don't know yet what is the exact number for the fourth quarter of last year and the first quarter of this year. This is going to imply then what's going to happen with the fiscal year. And I think that while your prime minister is a very strong leader, he has been distracted by domestic political issues when his attention should be concentrated on the economic issues. And on the economic issues, unfortunately, the macro outlook is not very great, because you have a large and growing fiscal deficits, and revenues have been surprising on the downside, and that constrains also how much you can spend, given the need to maintain a limited budget deficit. Inflation also, because of a number of factors, has been going upwards, and if there was an oil shock, of course, that's going to be negative. The trade balance and the fiscal deficit will be negatively affected by an oil price shock as well, so there could be further economic slowdown, and the pace of structural reform to increase potential growth has been slower than desirable and optimal, and some of those reforms, even the necessary ones, were botched in the way they were introduced and transitioned, like the GST or demonetization. And the other problem of India is, of course, is that you have on one side both traditional banks and shadow banks that have now a very large number of non-performing loans, and you have parts of the corporate sector where the private or even some of the public ones and the utilities are also saddled with debts. And now there is a credit crunch, and that credit crunch has also been squeezing investment, has been squeezing economic activity. Unemployment rate now is rising, and you've also had spikes in some prices, like some of the foodstuff, onions and others. And you have also a situation in which the incomes both of urban workers and rural workers have become weaker, and that slowed down consumption. So, as a country with the right macro and structural reform can go back to grow 7%, but unfortunately right now there is a cyclical and structural slowdown, and you have a global environment that is becoming somehow more cloudy rather than less cloudy. So concentration on economic policy is key.
You also like to call yourself as Dr. Realist.
Yes.
Realistically speaking right now, as we speak today, IMF has pegged India growth for FY20 at 5%. We have been much higher before. Realistically speaking, by the kind of measures our government and policymakers are taking, Do you think it will be difficult for us to go back, and if yes, how many quarters? Or do you think we may undershoot the 5% mark as well, the pace at which we are decelerating?
Well, for the next fiscal year that starts on April 1st, most likely growth might see an improvement. There has been an easy on monetary policy, even if the transmission from short rates to long rates and then to investment economic activity has been problematic because the credit channels are clogged with bad debts and bad assets. There has been some degree of a fiscal stimulus, but is constrained by lack of revenues, and a budget deficit might become excessive and put upward pressure on long rates. But I would say the policy stance on the macro side may be at least positive. But then I think that the government has to focus itself on at least announcing and having a plan and a schedule for doing a variety of structural reforms, including also cleaning up the financial system and cleaning up the bad debts and the bad assets, because that's going to be a necessary condition for restoring the business sector economic activity. So growth can pick up in the next fiscal year, but at best it's going to be slightly above 5%. I don't expect it to be anywhere above even 6%.
You've worked with various policymakers and governments across the world as advisor. What would your advice be to policymakers who are watching this interaction, the parts of the government, large corporates who are grappling with growth issues? They have, in fact, to give it to their due, they have taken a lot of policy measures, including sharp corporate tax cuts, and now the clamor for further reforms is only increasing because the budget is coming. What would some of the specific advice would be for measures to be taken so that at least the deceleration in growth can be arrested?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to maintain a true independence of the central bank that has to decide whether they should be cutting rates or raising them or staying on hold, independent of any political interference. And we see that interference even in the United States. Unfortunately, I think that you need to have a plan for improving your fiscal balances, because both at the central level and the local level, the budget deficit and the debt becomes a problem. You have to have a significant plan for cleaning up the financial system, both shadow banks and state-owned banks and other banks, and also dealing with the bad debts of the corporate sector, private and public. And you have to think about some of the more structural reform, whether it's a labor market or land reforms or things that are going to imply more innovation, more startups, and more productivity growth that are going to improve business and consumer sentiment and otherwise. And the problems of the incomes, stability also of the rural sector, that is a key driver that in consumption has to be addressed. Some of the agricultural policies have implied supply constraints that have reduced the growth rate of both production agriculture and the income of the rural worker as well. So there's a wide range of things that needs to be done. I think there is even some degree of consensus in India on what needs to be done. The question is whether there'll be a focus by policymakers on addressing those issues and not to be distracted by actually political things that create political uncertainty and policies uncertainty, and therefore they have a negative impact on business, investment, and consumer confidence.
How are you analyzing the investing environment in India? We have just negotiated a 18-20-month correction in the market, but foreign investors in general have come back, and FDI is also starting to come back, especially in the unlisted side. How do you see this as a market investing destination? Also, you study global premiers very closely, be it Mr. Trump or Mr. Xi Jinping. How do you see Prime Minister Modi as a leader?
Well, right now there's been this slowdown in growth, but conditional on a bunch of policy action being taken, there could be an improvement in the growth rate of the economy. But of course now there are global clouds with geopolitics, oil and other things that could have a negative impact. India has also been a country that has restricted some forms of foreign direct investment, even some forms of financial portfolio inflows, especially in fixed income and so on. So I would say that policies are opening up to foreign trade, foreign investment, and foreign direct investment will increase the amount of money we'll get into India. But I would say that the outlook for equity markets in India and other variety of risky assets is strongly correlated with economic growth, and that economic growth is correlated with macro and structural policies. As long as the policy goes in the right direction, as long as some of the clouds in the global economy do not become severe, you could have a pickup of growth that will be positive also for financial market. And as I pointed out, Prime Minister Modi is a strong leader, is a popular leader, but I think that he's been distracted by things that are not economic into other affairs. And I would say that the focus both of the Prime Minister and the policymaker has to be on the economic affairs, because at the end of the day, political popularity depends on delivering on economic popularity as well. If the economy is going to grow only 5%, let alone lower, that over time is going to erode also the popular support that the Prime Minister is facing. So I would say full-scale attention on the economic issues is key for achieving success.
Dr. Roubini, one second last question on your personal side. When I was researching about you, I came to know that despite of doing so well in life, you're generally a frugal guy. You don't like to waste money on opulence, and you also keep apart or used to regularly some of your income in regular investing vehicles. How important is leading a frugal or non-opulent life important, and regular investing for financial freedom or achieving good returns in the market?
Well, I think it's important to save enough, because if you don't save enough when you're young and during your working time, you're not going to have enough income for retirement, and traditional social security systems, whether that pays you go or otherwise, are not sufficient for giving you financial and income security in old age. So it's very important to have financial literacy, save in a diversified way, most likely in passive investment that are low cost, as opposed to gambling in the markets. And frugality is also to do with the fact that above a certain level of income, I think that happiness is unrelated to how much money or wealth you have. I know plenty of billionaires that are depressed and very miserable. And in life, it's not only about me, but also about caring about other people. You want to do well, but you want to do good, and compassion and caring about those that are not as successful. And there are lots of social problems and economic problems. And giving economic opportunity implies that being involved in a wide range of a non-profit activity and organization can give greater satisfaction than maximizing income or maximizing spending or wealth. So it's a question of having a meaningful life, not a financially wealthy life.
And talking of meaningful life, I understand that you started investing quite a lot of incremental time towards new subjects like yoga. A couple of years back, you started meditation. How's that changed your life so far, and how's this new color coming in your life?
Well, there is a Latin expression that says, mens sana in corpore sano, a healthy mind in a healthy body. I think that people in the last few years have started to emphasize the healthy body, trying to exercise and trying to be fit, because it's good actually for your physical health. But I think that there's a strong correlation between physical health and mental health, because mental health can have damaging effect on your physical, and whether you're physically healthy can also affect you psychologically. And I think that many people, starting with myself, are doing things like meditation. It's not just meditation, half an hour a day. It's the broader range of mindfulness activities, of being aware. And even activities like yoga is not just a physical. There is breath work, there's meditation, there's mindfulness involved in it. So I think those are key elements of having a healthy mind in a healthy body, and caring also about society and other people, and being compassionate to make you truly happy in a meaningful way. That's very important.
Right. Mr. Roubini, I'll let you go on that one. Thanks so much for your time. It was a very meaningful discussion we had, and thanks very much for this opportunity of interacting with you right here on ET Now.
Great being with you.